Mother, there's too many of you crying.
Good morning. This is Sandy Williams, the Earl Ingram Show. I'm sitting in for Earl today. Earl is otherwise predisposed, I guess. He can't be here today. Calvin, how are you this morning?
I'm doing pretty good, Earl. You know that
I'm
the
Sandy.
inclement weather we had yesterday disappeared awfully quickly.
It did. And winter came and left. It was like it just wanted to prove that it existed, and then it disappeared again. So Earl is gone this morning, and this is going to be an interesting segue. It might suggest why he's gone. But Kelvin, have you ever had a colonoscopy?
I can't say that I have.
Well, you know, it's a rite of passage. It's a rite of passage that's afforded to all of Americans through the benefit of Medicare or our health insurers. And it's a passage that announces that middle age onset is here, and now you need to get tested. And the colonoscopy process sounds awful. The preparation for it indeed is. I'm sure many listeners here have been through this process, but the procedure itself is like a non-process. I can confess that I had one of these things. I've had several of them, but the most recent one I had, I was sitting impatiently in the waiting room. And finally, I turned to the receptionist and I said, "When are they going to do this procedure?" And she said, "Oh, sir, they've done the procedure. You're just waiting for your ride home." So they have some magic anesthesia that kind of erases the whole process from your mind. So whatever it is that happens to you, who knows? But it comes and goes, but it is an announcement of middle age, and it's also interesting. It's a process in which the medical industry mines human beings. They're looking for things called polyps, and if they find a polyp in you, they can come back and do it again in 3 years or 5 years. But if they don't find a polyp, the insurance provisions don't allow them to come back for 10 years. And it's an amazingly expensive procedure. It's one of the reasons why American medical care is so expensive, because it costs almost as much, apparently, to have a colonoscopy as it does to have a baby. So, you know, I think a colonoscopy is an easier burden to carry, but anyway. So that's our friend Earl is in the process of heading on for one of those and can't be here today. I'm confident that he would rather be here today. Don't you think, Calvin?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, doing this radio show is definitely better than what they do to you during a colonoscopy.
Well, luckily he's hopefully will be asleep for what they're going to do to him this morning, but through the night probably was not a fun experience.
No, it's let's put it this way: the anticipation is much worse than the procedure. If I'm sure there'll be some caller that might be willing to share the same kind of experience. So I sat up kind of stark a couple of nights ago in the middle of the night and suddenly realized that what we're watching happen right now with the Trump administration feels and looks much more like what used to happen and what does happen, I guess, but what really used to happen with the king as they assembled their court. And so I went back and looked at some of the history. For instance, King George III. King George III was the King of England in 1776. He was the very king that the revolution was aimed at. And King George had a court, and the court was a mix of family figures, political figures, wealthy, noble people. And the main thing that was expected of the court was that they be absolutely loyal to the king. And the royal courtiers, as they were called, some of them became the officials of government, so the exchequer and the various positions of government were filled out of this group of courtiers. But the courtiers were mainly expected to be totally loyal to the king, and they would fall out of favor, and their status would be diminished at large and on the court if there was any act of disloyalty or any perceived act of disloyalty. In fact, for some kings, Henry VIII, for instance, was wont to lop off the heads of those who were disloyal. And same was true of Louis XVI in France. Louis's conduct with his court was so outlandish that it probably, in some respects, led to the French Revolution. But we can look at history and we can find these episodes in history, but in which extreme loyalty is required, personal loyalty is required to the leader, and typically it's in environments that we as Americans were found so repellent that we fled those countries and came here. England had another period of time which kind of smacks a little bit of the current. And that was the period of Oliver Cromwell. So Cromwell lived in England. I think anyone who's studied English history at all has heard of Oliver Cromwell. He led England from 1649 to 1660. He unseated the kings, but it wasn't like he was unseating the kings to create a democratic movement. He was unseating the kings because they were the establishment, and he was an anti-establishment figure who basically had a movement that was based on being against the then establishment, which was the Catholic Church. And he installed a government that was based on a Puritan morality. And there was an effort to infuse the laws of England with puritanical liturgical law. There began to be an upwelling against that to some extent. And so then Cromwell decided that he would dissolve Parliament, which was then in existence, and he became what was called the Lord Protector. And I would simply urge us all to be concerned about whether or not we ever have a leader who seems to be wanting to become the Lord Protector. But Cromwell was a period that ended up being a period of ruthless execution of opposition. It was a period of military tribunals, imprisonment for disloyalty. Loyalty to Cromwell was absolutely central, and it was the beginning of the end, really, of the English monarchical system. There were kings reinstalled after Cromwell, but Parliament had more power after Cromwell. and Cromwell is a sort of an ugly blot on the history of England. And we find today across the world, we're finding a similar sort of a trend running in other countries, running in the direction of authoritarianism. And we can look at different situations. We can look at Russia. I mean, Russia is an obvious example, but look at Turkey. Turkey under Erdogan has moved distinctly in the direction of more authoritarianism and more loyalty to required loyalty to Erdogan. And the free press in particular has been under attack, and the media has been under attack in Turkey. But a country that has received lots of attention from the right in America and is led by a fellow named Viktor Orban, the country of Hungary. And in Hungary, there's been an ongoing movement, a distinct movement led by Orban in the direction of creating a much more authoritarian government. And for some reason, Viktor Orban is sort of a darling of the right. He's come and he spoke to some conservative conventions here in the United States, and he's viewed by the right as being maybe sort of a heroic figure in terms of what he's doing to the government in Hungary. But what he's doing to the government in Hungary is kind of frightening. And most of the European Union is actually quite upset, and there's been a good deal of debate within the European Union about what it is that should be done about Hungary, since they seem to be violating so much in the way of civil liberties and operating in opposition to the general tenets of democracy that's a basis for the countries in the European Union. So Orban has been attacking the media, the freedom of the media. He's weakened the judicial independence, attacked judges, attacked courts, attempted to nominate and appoint the judiciary that would be loyal to him. He's undermined the checks and balances of the government there. And it created a hybrid form of democracy that's a blend of authoritarianism and democracy. And I would argue that it's very much like what is currently being discussed on the right as illiberal democracy. And we can talk about that briefly when we come back. But illiberal democracy is the basis for the Project 2025 document, and it's even, without being labeled that, discussed in Project 2025. And the most important element of Project 2025, the one they talk about most, is the strengthening of the White House, the establishment within the White House of the capacity to micromanage the rest of the government. And their reasoning is that the president is the only elected official in the executive arm. And because he's the elected official, he's speaking with the voice of the people. And therefore, the voice of the people, they say, should have every reason to be regulating every aspect of what goes on in the executive branch. And so their Project 2025 contemplates creating a government that is capable at the White House level of micromanaging all the departments, micromanaging the Department of Justice, micromanaging the FBI, micromanaging the U.S. attorney offices around the country, micromanaging the EPA, making sure that no rule gets adopted, no person gets prosecuted for a criminal violation. Nothing is done by the government that doesn't pass muster in the White House. What does that sound like? And how will that feel? We'll talk more about that when we come back.
Pick it loud and pick it sound. Don't punish me with brutality. Come on, talk to me. You can see what's going on. Yeah, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. I'll tell you what's going on. Right on, right on.
I'm fine. What?
Spit.
Good morning. You don't have London on the radio. This is the Earl Ingram Show. Sandy Williams sitting in for Earl Ingram. It's a little bit of God Save the King. It's a song we escaped in 1776, but I'm playing it today because I'm talking about the extent to which it sort of feels like what's happening in Washington right now is not just the assembly of a cabinet, but the assembly of a court. Okay, and the characteristics of a court, we talked about it in the first segment, but the characteristics of the members of a court tended to be the rich, the noble, but the extremely loyal. Okay, the court, a condition to being a courtier and having all the favors of the king was to, in exchange for that, to be loyal to the blood, to the king. And loyalty apparently is obviously one of the primary characteristics that's being sought after in the current cabinet. We talked a bit before as well about the trends around the world towards moving governments in the direction of authoritarianism. Talked about the key indicators of authoritarianism that has been, in many respects, I think, duplicated by what's going on here. I mean, you can look at the playbook for authoritarianism, the centralization of power in the executive branch, exactly what's called for in Project 2025. The marginalization of opposition, the claim of rigged elections or the rigging of elections, the attacks on the independent hostile media and the attempt to denigrate and to devalue the media and to have it lose its credibility. The increased use of state violence, meaning arresting protesters or cracking down on unpopular ethnic or other kinds of minorities, and populist rhetoric, where the leader claims to be saving the people, being the only legitimate defender of the national sovereignty, to save the government, to save the culture, to be the protector of the cultural identity. What does that sound like? I mean, that sounds in so many ways like the last campaign and what was being argued on the right. And then we were, I think, before the break, talking about what's going on around the country, and in particular, I think Viktor Orban of Hungary, and how it is that Viktor Orban seems to have become a darling of the conservatives here in America, the conservative movement in America. He's spoken, I think, the Heritage Foundation supported him to come and give a speech. And he's talked about a great deal from the right, and seems to be revered in some fashion. Donald Trump talks about him a lot and calls him a great leader. But most of the people in the European Union, the other leaders in the European Union, are sort of appalled by what it is that's happening in Hungary and what Viktor Orban is orchestrating in the way of a shift from a democratic regime to something that is much more like an authoritarian regime. And when we delve into Project 2025 and we see what it's asking for, which is basically the creation of this White House that is populated by a large number of operatives, people who are then capable of micromanaging the rest of federal government, micromanaging the EPA, micromanaging the Department of Justice. First of all, a big part of that that's required is that you have cabinet officials who fill the cabinet jobs in each of those places, who are absolutely loyal to the White House and will implement the policies of the White House. You then also create within the White House the capability of watching over that. One of the things that Project 2025 calls for in the first 40 pages of it is the creation of an Office of Personnel that allows the incoming president to fire as many people in the federal government as can be fired legally by the White House. And that number is easily 5,000 personnel, but it looks like it could be as large as 15,000 heads that could roll. And then those jobs would all have to be refilled. The refilling of those jobs would be carried out under a loyalty test to the White House and its policies and to its leader. And the problem with that kind of a structure for the government, if that's really the way the government's going to operate, When a Republican gets elected, 15,000 heads roll, and now you have a whole bunch of new people who have to get the jobs have to get filled, and they implement a set of policies. Well, what happens if the American public decides they don't like those policies, and 4 years later they elect a Democrat? 15,000 heads roll, and now we have the pendulum swinging not just further and further, but faster and faster in a manner that is highly destabilizing. So the fact is that the only way this kind of centralized government can work and be stable is if that central leader is there for a long time. You can't switch leaders every 4 years and have a government that gets unfolded and refolded every 4 years, that has policies that swing from all the way to the left to all the way to the right every 4 years. That would be so destabilizing. It would destroy our economy. It would destroy our capacity to have business planning. It would destroy our capacity to plan personally our futures. And so what's really implicitly required under the Project 2025 concept of the American government, with the White House micromanaging everything, is a president who is president for longer than 4 years, longer probably than 8 years. It's one of the reasons why authoritarian regimes last a long time, is that it's kind of required that they last a long time under the procedures that are set up where a strong man runs the whole show. And so I think people talk about authoritarianism, and those on the right would say that this is hysteria. What are you talking about? But I think we need to watch in the world. I think we can watch history, and we can say that, look, we're all human beings. We all suffer from the foibles of human nature. And when you hand someone the capacity to have all that power, the likelihood is that they might grab it. And if they grab it, what's the outcome from that? We'll talk more about this when we return. Good morning, the Earl Ingram Show. Sandy Williams sitting in for Earl Ingram. Playing music here today about the King of America, since I think some of us have a concern or a fear that that's what we're hatching, or that's at least what someone would like us to be hatching. You can call in. The call-in number is 855-752-4842. We'd like to hear from you. Talking this morning about how much it feels like what's happening in Washington right now is not just the assembly of the cabinet, but the putting together of the King's Court. You know, the courtiers, and the people that are being appointed to the cabinet in so many ways feel like courtiers. They're many of them billionaires themselves, wealthy, gadflies, people who are social gadflies, media gadflies, people who primarily, the primary thing they have is a strong personal loyalty to Donald Trump, not necessarily a long history of being a Republican, but a history of being extremely loyal to Donald Trump. And so, I thought we should maybe look at this court that he's putting together, and who are these courtiers, and what kind of danger do they pose? Because after being someone who subjected myself to 900 pages of Project 2025 to try and figure out what it is that might be hatched in the way of a government, it became very clear that Project 2025 is based on this concept of an illiberal democracy. And in fact, the sort of ideologues, the ideologically bound people who were part of drafting Project 2025 will talk to you about the illiberal democracy. They will, in fact, be unlikely to use the term democracy and will want to use the term republic as a distinction from a democracy. A republic being something that's run by, for instance, the U.S. Senate, which is elected on the basis of geography, not people. A republic is something more complicated and nuanced than a democracy, where one person, one vote prevails, and we decide things on that democratic basis. But the right is much more interested in this kind of republic notion. And the illiberal democracy is described as that because what they want to do is tilt the scale, put the scale on the balance of power in government, and put the scale in the direction of putting more power in the hands of the executive branch. And by the executive branch, they don't just mean the departments, they mean the White House. They mean the person who occupies the White House. And they want the White House to be the entity that controls in every way all elements of the executive branch. And the executive branch is the way we execute all the laws of our country. That's what the term executive means. The laws are passed by Congress, but they are executed, put into place by the executive branch. And so the Project 2025 would have the White House capable of running every aspect of the Department of Justice, every aspect of every agency. And the president seems to be appointing people who will be accommodating him in that regard. And so, for instance, let's take Robert Kennedy Jr. And the question is, does the appointment of someone like Robert Kennedy Jr. pose dangers to us, or what should we be concerned about the appointment of someone like Robert Kennedy Jr.? And so, what does he stand for? Well, I guess the question I'd say is, do we care about it? Well, I think we will care about it. Let's say that instead of COVID having happened in 2019, let's say COVID happens in 2025. How would Robert F. Kennedy Jr. lead our health agencies in terms of their response to COVID in 2025? And I think it's concerning, because Robert Kennedy has demonstrated the fact that he doesn't necessarily listen to all the facts. I mean, I'm all for cynics. I'm all for skeptics. I'm for people who want to question big pharma as to whether they're actually always operating in the public interest. But there's no question that vaccinations have saved millions and millions of lives. I come from a generation that watched the horrors of polio, and I watched polio disappear from the face of the earth in 3 years. You know, from the onset of the discovery of Salk vaccine to the end of polio as a problem could be counted in months. Okay, and there were many people dying of polio in my youth, and polio was a youthful disease. Many of us are alive today because we didn't die of one of the childhood diseases against which we were vaccinated. We didn't die of scarlet fever because we had antibiotics. We didn't die of whooping cough or some of the diseases that took children at an early age because we were vaccinated against it. Now, you know, do vaccinations carry a potential downside? Maybe, but the upside of vaccination is obvious and very palpable. And for those of us who have lived to a ripe old age, many of us have gotten here because of the advantages we had. So, should big pharma be carefully watched? Yes. Should drugs be carefully tested before they're put on the market? Absolutely. But you know, are we endangered by someone who maybe operates on a knee-jerk and conspirational basis with respect to public health? I think very possibly, and I think that loyalty to Donald Trump, number one, and number two, popularity in the world of influencers on the internet are not necessarily the basis upon which we can decide whether someone is going to bring sound public policy into something like public health. I don't know. Do we have some callers, Calvin? I think we have.
We have Debbie from Bayside.
All right. Debbie?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Going back to the first part of your conversation about the authoritarians like Orban and others, the right, of course, we know for decades, starting with McCarthy and the John Birch Society, were so opposed to anything that smacked of communism or authoritarianism. And that was the case up until just very recent few years. How has the right been manipulated into thinking, for example, Tucker Carlson's trip to Putin and some of the people cozying up to him, and the fact that Trump will side most likely with Putin when it comes to resolving the Ukrainian crisis? How did this happen?
Well, it's very, very interesting, Debbie, that you mentioned that, because Calvin and I, before we went on the air, I asked Calvin, I said, well, in fact, I'll ask you now, Calvin. Calvin, if you were going to sit down with a friend and have an animated discussion about something that worries you about a national trend or something, what is it that you would probably be talking about? And what did you say?
Yeah, well, I said that the right Republicans, specifically MAGA Republicans specifically, seems to have this at least apologetic in the best cases, but in the worst cases, downright support for Russia, and the confusion that I've felt over that sentiment and the shift that how that's been over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is remarkable that the Republican Party, which is always was the most hawkish of all of the political movements during the Cold War, has somehow swung in a direction of extreme sympathy towards authoritarian governments. I mean, Russia is not a communist government, okay? Russia is an authoritarian government. Viktor Orban is bringing authoritarianism to Hungary. Trump will talk about and be sympathetic to and want to have the same kind of power as Xi in China, because all of his generals are loyal to him and stand up. He said the same about Kim Jong-un. I ask the same question. Why has the right become so sort of seduced by the attractiveness of authoritarianism? And I suspect it's because they are worried about the inexorable movement of what will happen in the context of a plurality. What is the vote, the democratic vote, going to look like, and how will that play out in terms of politics Republican and Democrat in the long run. Now, this last election suggested there were trends towards Republicans amongst even those who have been in the past counted upon as being Democrat. And I think the great substitution theory, this conspiracy theory that's been talked about, that the Democrats are basically sponsoring immigrants because these immigrants will substitute the population will become substituted, no longer to be Western European as it always has been, but the great substitution will be of people from other parts of the world, of other colors, other ethnicities, and that was viewed as a cultural danger. And I think it's part of the cultural danger that is talked about by Donald Trump when he says he's going to protect the fabric of America, the blood of America. But I'm surprised by the extent to which it seems to have caught on amongst the intellectuals. The ideological basis for the Republican Party seems to have moved in this direction. The right-wing think tanks who are embracing Viktor Orban, and I guess it might be that there's just viewed as this legitimacy towards overcoming the plural vote, the result of democracy that could occur with the change in the demographics of America by having a strong arm, a strong man leader, and a government organization that will overcome the plural vote with strongman powers. And it seems so cynical, but then again, we watched gerrymandering being carried out in a very cynical fashion, and obviously gerrymandering was all about trying to suppress votes in a fashion, or at least the result of votes. And so maybe there just is a very cynical operation ongoing here that's ideologically driven and driven by the intellectual right to create a government form that is this illiberal democracy, meaning that that a strong person president will have enough power to maintain power in a manner that would hold on to it for the conservative movement. I don't know. I mean, that's my only explanation for it. I'd be interested if we have callers who have a different view. I think we, in fact, have Tom from Los Angeles on the line. Tom?
Yes, good morning. Good morning, Sandy. First, I am a proud FDR Democrat, and it's been the regressive side of the aisle and their goal since Reagan to defeat FDR and the New Deal because it gave too much power to the common person. And what happened, in my opinion, is first you have Ronald Reagan saying that government is the problem. So basically, let's tear down government. Government doesn't work. And then you have, I'll speed up a few years, but then you have in Wisconsin, one of the most wonderful places in the world and the nicest people in the world. And what they did is they brought Scott Walker in, and that's the same time that money in politics through Citizens United became legal bribery for the donors.
Tom, stay on. Wait, I'm just interrupting you for the break. Stay on. We'll talk to you at the and we come back on the other side. Good morning. The Earl Ingram Show. Sandy Williams in for Earl Ingram. Earl's indisposed, I think would be the best thing to describe. Earl's having a, well, he's going through the rite of passage we all have in middle age this morning, a colonoscopy, if you can believe it. Some people might wish that upon him, but not me. We've got Tom on the line. The music I'm playing relates to Royalty King of America. I guess I'm talking today about a fear I have that we might be putting into the White House shortly someone who has a view that maybe that's what he wants to be. Tom, you were talking about the trend we have in terms of the right shifting in the direction of authoritarianism.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to start over if it's okay, but basically the progressive side of the aisle, their main goal was to defeat FDR's New Deal because it gave too much power to the common person. If we look at from the 40s to the 70s, the middle class had the most power that it probably ever has had. And because of that, they had people going to the streets and they had people, fighting for their rights, and they had all these different things, and they needed to calm down the rabble rousers and put them in their place. So basically the regressives and Ronald Reagan brought about through the Powell document, Buckley versus Vallejo and First National Bank versus Bellotti, which said corporations are people and money is free speech. Then you move to when George, I call him war criminal Bush for the W, he comes to him and they have the Supreme Court that basically puts Citizens United into place, which says corporations can give unlimited amount of money to campaigns. So then what you got is, like I said, people in Wisconsin who are wonderful people and love their neighbors and all the different things. And I would say a very, very sound Judeo-Christian type values. And what they wanted to do was to divide and conquer. And Scott Walker said that directly to Widow Hendricks in a YouTube clip. And I recommend everyone look at it. But basically what it was the Koch brothers and the different Bradley Foundation and all the different people wanted to turn neighbors against neighbors and people against people. And they actually did it. And they thought, wow, if we can do this in a honest state like Wisconsin, then we can take this nationwide. And that's basically what they have done. Now what they've done is they still want to destroy government so they can sink it in the bathtub. So it's no longer there. So we are moving into the authoritarian dictatorship through Project 2025. However, I do have a little bit of hope, Sandy, believe it or not. And that is that, when you're talking about the administrative state and you're talking about all these different departments, whether it's the Department of Education, whether it's the Defense Department, all those different things, they have over 2 million, 3 million people behind them that are also part of we the people government. And I wasn't thinking about this until when people started bringing up like Matt Gaetz having this many people under him and all these different, it's about managing a number and a gross number of people that I somehow think that they might be a little too, I don't want to say stupid, but I will, I guess. I think they might not have enough organizational skills to actually pull this off.
Well,
and I think the people maybe in those areas will be able to actually make a difference and, overcome, at least here in America. And that'd be my question to you. In the other countries, has this been the playbook? Has the playbook been to?
Well, yes. Yeah. I mean, in Viktor Orban, the other countries, they've gone to great lengths to try to destroy civil service and the rights and to try to extend the power of appointment of the elected official deeper and deeper into the bureaucracy so that jobs become much more like patronage, like they used to be before the development of civil service in America. I mean, we should all understand the right seems to forget all the examples of history, but the whole reason we have civil service is that it used to be the situation where jobs in government were patronage, and it wasn't about competence; it was simply about political loyalty, and it created essentially an incompetent, corrupt government. But Project 2025 thinks about exactly what you're talking about, Tom. And Project 2025 wants to set up an institute of education for everyone coming into the government to train them on how to harness the bureaucracy, how to essentially overcome the resistance of what they call that bureaucracy, all those thousands of people who are below the appointment level, below these 15,000 people who can be fired by the White House. They want to set up an institute to train the new 15,000 people who are going to come in and replace all those who get fired, and to be replaced by people who have pledged loyalty and fealty to the president. They want to train them on how to control that lower echelon people, the people who are the flywheels, who stay in government term in and term out. And so they understand that complexity, and I'm worried that they might actually be working hard at doing a better job, in my mind, a horrible job of containing that and controlling that in a manner that will give the White House a great deal more power. We'll be back shortly. Good morning. Earl Ingram Show. Sandy Williams sitting in for Earl Ingram. He'll be back. Well, maybe he won't be back next week. I think next week he's off. But anyway, he'd rather be here today than what he's doing. We're talking about the incoming cabinet and the process of what I would describe as the king appointing his court. The music relates all to King for a Day, and I do have a fear that the trend we see is one in which the government that's incoming wants to be much more authoritarian and much more centralized than the outgoing government, and whether that poses a hazard or not, I happen to think it does. I think the safeguards we have and the checks and balances between the executive branch and the rest of government were worked out over time carefully and are going to be dismantled maybe potentially very quickly. We have someone on the line. I guess we have Gary from Sussex on the line. Is that correct? Gary?
Yes, you do, Sandy. Hey,
how are you?
First off, good. Hey, I want to hope that Earl does well. I had a colonoscopy almost 20 years ago. I'm 72. I was 50 when I had it done.
Yeah, right. It's a rite of passage, right? Yeah.
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 They found precancerous polyps in me, and they cut them out. And then I went back for every year for 3 years, and they said I'm fine. But I keep getting them all the time. But if I did not,
well, let me tell you, like I said, the medical industry is so happy when they find a polyp because it's a very expensive procedure. If they didn't find any, they would have had to wait 10 years. So, it was maybe lose-win as far as you're concerned. But yeah, go ahead.
I'm happy. I hope that everything turns out fine. Now,
yeah.
What I do want to talk to you about. Yesterday, I asked Earl a question, and I said, do you hope that Donald Trump fails and hopes that this country goes to hell, or do you hope that he does well and the country does well, we all prosper? And he was so mad, he didn't actually come out and say, I hope he fails, I hope our country goes to hell. I don't want Trump to do well. Well, don't we all want Trump to do well, our president, no matter what, and that our country will prosper under next 4 years, and then maybe the Democrats can get in there? And I always hope that whoever in power does well. And
listen. You've asked the question. I definitely hope that the country does well. I think anyone who's alive and breathing wants that to be the case. I think the question will be, how do we define well? Okay, how do we define doing well? And so long as that's a properly defined term, and the country in fact performs well according to a definition that we can all agree upon, or that at least I can agree upon, that's what I want to have happen. I just don't want to have some important elements of our government structure broken. I think that there are things that are awfully important about the design of our government, the design of our processes, that we can't lose. But do I want things to go well? Absolutely. But I think you and I and others would have to sit down and figure out, what are we going to measure? This is what you do in business too. What are we going to measure to figure out whether we did well? And if we can agree on that, and if we do well, that's absolutely what I want.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to jump in here for a second, and I think it's a little bit of a misinterpretation of what Earl meant by saying he hopes Trump fails. He's not saying he hopes the country suffers or does poorly. He is saying that the policies and the plans that Trump is proposing are going to be destructive, and he hopes Trump fails at doing those policies. But Gary, go ahead.
Okay, so that's why I explained it. I said he really hummed about it, but the fact is, he said he hopes that Trump fails. But if Trump does well, Calvin, that means that the country's going to do well in turn. And,
wait, Gary. Now, just a minute, Gary. Just let me interrupt. We have to work on semantics here. We have to decide what doing well means. If doing well means eliminating all forms of diversity in all kinds of places, then I don't agree that I want that to happen. And if it does happen, I won't agree that we're doing well in that regard. If doing well means that we cut taxes and that the economy thrives, but the middle class doesn't, if the middle class continues to suffer, if they can't afford health care, if we continue to have the outcomes we have, then I won't agree that we did well. Okay, so I mean, this doing well concept is a difficult one, and we can't just say because the stock market's going up like mad that we're doing well, right? I mean, you would agree with that. You can't just look at the stock market and decide that if it's flying high that we're doing well.
No, I agree 100%.
Okay, and you can't say that we're doing well if the GDP goes up, but if the way the GDP is shared is such that we continue to have a lot of people living paycheck to paycheck in an environment that they can't that creates a financial struggle. And I don't mean just for below the middle class, but I mean a broad interpretation of the middle class. Then we wouldn't be doing well either, right?
Well, yes. Now, everything is dependent on one thing. The high prices, inflation, prices at the grocery stores and whatever we buy, it all comes down to, if you look at it, it all comes down to oil. It really does. What it costs to make the stuff, driving.
Well, Gary, that isn't true. So, I mean, we can do an economic correlation or evaluation. Oil is a basic commodity, and the price of oil will affect the price of a number of other things. Now, the price of oil is not directly tied to the price of electricity any longer. It's the price of natural gas that's tied to the price of electricity. But and so what you say is a simplification, but it's simply not true. The price of oranges will vacillate. The price of eggs will vacillate tremendously, regardless of the price of oil. So what you say is simplistic. And we'll find out. But incidentally, the price of oil isn't going to matter with respect to the price of gasoline if we don't increase refining capacity. And there is no talk of that.
Well, he's going to drill, baby, drill. But the thing is, as far as the $2 trillion that's over the budget, if we can start cutting some of this crazy spending, and some of these people that work in government that are absolutely doing nothing, just getting rid of them. How
much
small business?
Okay, so but your small business runs into local government much more than it runs into federal government. Okay, and I've talked to small business people, and many of them are upset about building codes. They're upset about all kinds of things which don't have anything to do with the federal government. And when the federal government gets cut, it's not going to affect building codes and the rest of that. But people talk about all that waste in government, and but the biggest programs. Do you think that there's waste in the delivery of your Social Security check? Do you think that's inefficiently delivered to you, and that there are people that could get cut out of the Social Security administration? Because it's a very efficient. It's a very efficient program. Yeah. And do you think that Medicare, the administrative arm of Medicare, is an efficient operation, or do you think that it's probably delivered efficiently? Because it's a check-cutting program like Social Security.
I think it's doing well, but the fact is,
okay, all right. Now, I'm just saying we're talking about the biggest components of the federal budget. I mean, the biggest expenditure components of the federal budget are run quite efficiently. So if you decide that the federal budget is whatever it is, $7 trillion, and if $4.5 trillion of that is delivered efficiently, because it's basically a check cutting programs, you've got $2.5 trillion left. If you want to be efficient and cut, if you think that do you think there's 20% inefficiency in the rest of it? I mean, you can just do some math, Gary, and you can figure out that we're not talking about these big dollars that are, the Doge, this Doge movement, the Doge agency. It's not an agency, that's run by Musk and Ramaswamy. If you cut 15% out of everything else, you're not talking about a huge amount of money. You're not talking about changing the economy. So, I mean, we like to arm wave, and yes, we should have an efficient government, but we got to be realistic about how many dollars we can accomplish, and what the meaning of the cutting of those dollars is. I mean, it's again, that's what you said was a simplification, just like saying that oil is the underpinning of the entire economy. It's not true. Okay, that's not true.
Well, that's my opinion. And what I was saying about my business, I only have 5 people in my business, and I have to run it as efficiently as I can. And if I had just one person flagging on a job and loafing off, and that, it would wreck my business. And the fact is, the government with Ramaswamy and the
Musk.
Musk looking Musk looking into this stuff and trying to trim the budget. I think this is a good thing. This is not a bad thing, and it's going to
No,
help everybody. It's going to help you and me and everybody else.
no one disagrees with making the government efficient. I think everyone other than the military and the defense establishment would like to see an audit of the Defense Department, and that's probably the place with the greatest amount of waste, okay? Undoubtedly. But nobody wants to get their arms around that. Would you like to focus on the Defense Department, Gary?
Hey, thanks a lot for letting me talk so long and not interrupting me. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah.
I love talking to you, Sandy. Good luck. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, we'll be back shortly talking more about the King's Court.
There's a black hat caught in a high tree top. There's a flagpole rack and the wind won't stop. I have stood here before inside the pouring rain, with the world turning circles running round my brain. I guess I'm always hoping that you'll end this way, but it's my destiny to be the king of pain.
Welcome to the Earl Ingram Show. Sandy Williams sitting in for Earl Ingram. That's Sting, the King of Pain. I'm talking this morning about my fear that what we're watching in Washington is the king installing his court, as much as we're watching a president create his cabinet. And been talking about as well the trend, what seems to be the ideological trend of the right towards authoritarianism, towards a much more of a strongman president. And we have an elected president who seems to have loyalty and fealty to the president as a primary basis for his appointments. And, I think we can talk about some of the other cabinet members. I think the next one we'll talk about is Peter Hegseth, his nominee to be the Secretary of Defense, and what all that portends. But we do have some callers. We've got Jean from Eau Claire. Jean?
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. Very, very interesting show. Great show this morning. I agree with Ellie, Tom, and you, of course, because this hasn't happened overnight. This has been deliberate, and it's been tried in states at the same time. I've been following it since, I used to live in a city, and then I moved rural, and I didn't get any information. It drove me bananas because I didn't have cable, and the internet service was really poor, if you got it at all. And I started listening to the radio, and I would hear the messaging starting early in the morning all the way through the evening. Same message over and over and over again. The libs and all of the really negative things on Obama when he ran, on Mary Burke when she ran the day before the election. They called and said Mary Burke was fired by her father, and that was a big lie, but there was no way to respond. I did my one call per day. But anyway, this is programming, neuro-linguistic programming. You hit a thing, you get an emotion, and it sticks in people's heads. They don't even try to rationalize. Then I started talking to people who, had very, very negative attitudes toward libs and anything they did, and everything they did, they were ripping the people off, and all these different things, and they couldn't explain why. This is subconscious. And there were psychologists, my background psych, and people who worked in that area saying, this is dangerous, you need to stop this. But it's gotten to a point that it's like we need a national deprogramming if anybody knows anybody that needs to start doing this. However, when Gary brings up his furnace business, and I think he does air conditioning, I'm not sure, but I'll tell you something. I admire that, and that takes a specialist to be able to do it. Not anybody can do it. And there was a very wealthy person who I heard with my own ears who was all upset because he had to pay the furnace man to come to his house, and he got what the furnace man made for hours in a half an hour or 15 minutes. But he was outraged. Now, would you like somebody like that going through your furnace business that doesn't even know anything about furnaces? I think it's really important that people pay attention to this. Yeah, there's a lot of people who are very, very wealthy, very successful, that can't do a checkbook because they have their people doing it. There's a lot of people that don't understand how different areas are run. They have no education whatsoever.
So your point here is that these appointments to the cabinet who have no experience in what it is the cabinet does, but might have money, that their wealth doesn't really mean that they're well qualified for the job. Is that where you're headed with this?
Yes, I am. And I was trying to go around it a different way because I thought maybe some people could identify it with their personal, like telling somebody going through a restaurant or a store or restaurant and saying, oh, yeah, you can put this stuff on the market even longer. It's in a can. We don't need expiration dates. That's BS,
Yeah, yeah.
Different things like that, ridiculous things that we know maybe, but some people who don't even do their own grocery shopping, who don't even clean their own cars, who don't even do those types of things, well, they can't be in charge of this,
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what you pointed out is one of the dangers of making loyalty the sole basis for appointment and ideological purity, because the Defense Department, for instance, Peter Hegseth, this guy who's been appointed to that, has no experience running tens of thousands of people in a business, in an organization. And if you're going to run a big organization, it should be important that you have some experience running a big organization. I think we have Cindy from Appleton on. Cindy?
Yep. Good morning, Sandy. Well,
Hi.
first of all, I'd like to respond to Gary because these Republicans just seem to me like they only care about themselves. They don't care about anyone else. I, for one, don't want us to drill, baby, drill, because I give a damn about the environment. And, I mean, the last 4 years Trump was in, he did nothing for anybody except the rich. That's what he's going to do again. So the rich are going to do well. The rest of us are going to suffer.
Well, that was my point to Gary in terms of, I think everyone wants the country to do well. I think what we need to convene a meeting on is to figure out what it means for the country to do well, And I think for too long, there's been a lot of breastfeeding, for instance, when some measurements of the economy are doing great, there's breastfeeding amongst the leaders to say, the economy's doing great. Well, that doesn't help Tom, Dick, and Mary if they aren't doing great. And I think the last two elections where the incumbents got beaten had a lot to do with Tom, Dick, and Mary not sharing in the wealth like they would and should like to. We'll be back more to talk about the king and his court after the break.
There's a little black spot on the sun today. It's the same old thing as yesterday. I stood here before inside the pouring rain. The world turned in circles running around my brain. I guess I'm always hoping that you'll end this way. Everyone's creeping up to the money god, putting toes where they didn't ought to be, on stepping stones of human hearts and souls, into the land of nothing for free. Well, the way that we live is a take.
Welcome to the Earl Ingram Show. Sandy Williams sitting in for Earl Ingram. You can call into the show today. It's 855-752-4842. Playing music about that one was, I think it was called King for a Day by Ecstasy. But I'm talking about the king and his court, the creation of this cabinet. The whole thing. Suddenly, a couple of days ago, I got the sense that what this felt much more like was the assembly of a court by a king, with loyalty tests being the most important standard for admission to the court and for continuation on the court. And we saw that from 2016 to 2020, how important loyalty was and how quickly one could get banished from the court. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out going forward. But it's clear that going into this next administration, they've elevated the loyalty test to a much higher degree. And the next member of the court I wanted to talk about was Peter Hegseth, who is the nominee for the Department of Defense Secretary. And what's interesting about Hegseth is that, much of what the right is talking about now is how upset they are with the Ivy League smarty pants Democrats, okay? But Josh Cawley, one of those people, Ted Cruz, one of those people, Peter Hegseth, one of those people, J.D. Vance, the vice president, Donald Trump himself, all of these people went to Ivy League schools. Peter Hegseth is a Princeton graduate. Ted Cruz is a Princeton Harvard graduate. Josh Cawley, Yale. The president, Wharton School at Penn. All of these are the same Ivy League institutions that are apparently what epitomizes what's so awful about the elite, the elite liberals. So what is it that differentiates these people? Apparently, only thing that differentiates them in terms of their elitism is that they are members of the elite right, okay? And they came out of these institutions with a conservative bent rather than a liberal bent, which apparently sanctifies them. It washes them of this taint of having been to an Ivy League school and puts them in the list of preferred entrants. So Peter Hegseth, who is he? Well, went to Princeton, served in the National Guard, and had several tours of active duty in the military at a low officer level. And then has been a Fox News commentator, made money on the side, apparently a considerable amount of money on the side, but has no experience running a big business. He has no experience at a senior level in the military. And his primary claim to fame are several books he's written, which if you read them, I read reviews of them and summaries of them, are pretty horrifying. The things that he stands for with respect to the military are, one, to get rid of what he would call wokeism in the military. What is his definition of woke? Well, it has to do with diversity. There should be, as far as he's concerned, there should be no diversity initiatives in the military whatsoever. He doesn't want women in combat. He wants women to play the role that is more natural for their gender, whatever that means. And he's very big on loyalty to the president and commander in chief, political loyalty at the highest level of the military. And what are we talking about in this new Department of Defense? Well, they're talking about installing a loyalty review board. One of the first things that Trump is talking about doing is to carry out a loyalty review of all of the top brass of the military, and to derank or even court-martial anybody in those top ranks who doesn't pass a loyalty test. Okay, now, I mean, I don't think they use the word loyalty. I think what they use is a term that's designed to mean the capability to lead. But clearly, what's involved here is ideological loyalty to the President of the United States, to be a part of the top brass of the military. He wants to purge the top brass and replace it with people who have this characteristic. Well, what does that sound like? I mean, if you have a military that's essentially pledged its fealty to the leader, you have something that looks like a civilian-led junta. Okay, I mean, in the Banana Republic, you have military juntas that take over governments, meaning that the military put their might behind somebody, and then that somebody gets elevated to be leader of the country with the support of the military. It's pretty hard if the military is willful about this. Who can stand up to the military? I mean, there's nobody that can stand up to the military in a country because they're armed and nobody else is. So seizing control of the military in this fashion is a very invidious prospect, as far as I'm concerned, for what it is that America has been and what it is that America could be in the future. And whereas we have General Mattis and others who will tell you that the pledge taken by people when they enter the military and become an officer, their pledge to defend the Constitution, is what will override anything that the president does. But the fact is that the president is the commander in chief. And if the commander in chief orders you to do something which you might view to be unconstitutional, you are put between a rock and a hard spot. You can do the undoable as far as the military is concerned and defy an order because you believe that it's unconstitutional, and then stand up to court-martial for that, or you can defy the order and see where that gets you. Okay, and so the question is, how many people in how many circumstances put between that rock and that hard spot will do the right thing as far as the Constitution is concerned, or will they do the right thing as far as military protocol is concerned and follow the order? I mean, I think we found out in Germany that there were plenty of people in Germany who fell back on the notion that I was following orders, okay? And that's why I did what I did. And in fact, as far as Nuremberg was concerned, the court in Nuremberg gave plenty of people an out for that reason, because if they were far enough down the line in the military and were following orders, that was the defense that overrode all other things. Now, I'm not saying the military is going to be turned on the American people, but having said that, I think one of the things that we're talking about doing in this next administration is using the military within the United States to carry out the orders of the president. And in this respect, it's with respect to what he would describe as illegal immigrants, to round them up, okay? And I think that there was an exchange of tweets in which somebody tweeted that the president was going to declare a state of emergency, and he would order the military to be put under the command of ICE for the purpose of carrying out the rounding up of immigrants. And the president put out a tweet and captioned it "true" with respect to that very tweet. So apparently Donald Trump does plan on doing this. So, you know, when you talk about military juntas and the danger of a military junta and what it might mean to politics in the United States, and we can dismiss it as not likely, because those in positions of command will follow their promise to uphold the Constitution before they follow the order of the President of the United States. I think we better hold our breath on that one, okay? And I think what we would prefer to see is a President of the United States and a Secretary of the Department of Defense who have as first and foremost in their mind the protection of the Constitution. I think that Peter Hegseth is someone who you can doubt with respect to that quite easily. His books suggest that he wants to use the military to deal with the ideological left, that he talks in the same terms as Project 2025, suggesting in his books that essentially those who are protecting the sanctity of the United States, the cultural heritage of the United States. Remember when I was talking about what it was that was the playbook for authoritarianism? Peter Hegseth in his books talks that same language, and he talks about how it is that the military is the last bastion to protect the United States against these dangers that are posed by the left. It's all very much as if Joe McCarthy would be appointed to be Secretary of the Department of Defense in many respects. When you read the books and then you think about this person taking charge of the military, it's frightening. It's quite frightening. I think we have Mike from Kenosha on. Mike?
Yes. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah.
Hey, I have to say, first of all, anybody in my world, in how we were raised, any official who takes the oath to the Constitution, even if it's at this point a civilian, to me, when push does come to shove, they have the same obligation to defend the flag as if a soldier would be on the battlefield. And I'm serious when I say that. If we have an executive in office who is sworn to protect the U.S. Constitution, my expectation is he steps up in a big way. And I'm really concerned about where we're going. I like what you're talking about regarding Hegseth, but I don't like when we continue to talk about Fox News being news, because they're influencers. Hegseth is an influencer. They're not journalists. They have nothing to do. They have their own agenda. They don't have the public's agenda, and that's, to me, what differentiates them between them. But like so many of your callers have said, the narrative, the messaging that the right-wingers have been allowed to do for decades, especially in these rural areas, has absolutely changed the way the thought process of these Americans, and it's rotten to the core. They've been insulting and doing the divide and conquer since Limbaugh was talking feminazis, for crying out loud, back in the late 80s and early 90s. That's how long we've allowed these people to go down this cesspool, this narrative of divide and conquer politics, and it's worked. So, I just have to say this. If you elect the wrong people to serve in government, these people who have been known to be self-servants and have shown no loyalty to the U.S. Constitution, you get what you deserve. And I'm sorry to say that, but I'm so disappointed in America. We had all the warning signs. In my opinion, this is a layup election, and we fell flat on our face, primarily because we let them control the BS narrative, and we never, ever demanded to have equality and truth to power as our founding, guiding light when it comes to debates or our elections. No, we've slowed our elections down.
We had a caller who called in and talked about neurolinguistics, this notion of essentially the notion that these influences are actually grooming us in a manner. What do you think we do about that? I mean, you don't want to revert all the way to censorship. So how do we deal with the fact that there is this neurolinguistics going on, this grooming, this influence process that takes people down a path that they think is sound as far as they're concerned. They think they're pursuing a path of loyalty and patriotism, but they're being groomed in a manner. How do we deal with that?
I think fact checking, number one, calling things out. For example, trickle down. Still, we have an economy that's rocking and rolling. The problem is it's not trickling down. And if we would just revert back to, hey, guess what? If we had the same tax code that we had back in 1975 as now, we'd all be making $40,000 more a year.
Hang on, Mike. We're going to a break. We'll be back shortly for the last segment.
I'm a crawling king snake, and I rule my den.
Good morning, the Earl Ingram Show, last segment. Sandy Williams sitting in for Earl Ingram. He'd much rather be here, but he's not. And that's The Crawling King Snake by John Hooker. Today's show has been about, in my mind, what we're watching in Washington looks much more like a king putting together his court. And I don't know, for some reason, I thought the title of Crawling King Snake was kind of an interesting one. But so I think we have Mike on the line, but is Mike still on the line, Calvin? But so we were before the break talking about how it is that we've got coming into our government people like Peter Hegseth, who is in many respects much more like an influencer than he is like and a gadfly. Than he is someone who's positioned and qualified to be Secretary of Department of Defense. And the extent to which this incoming administration is kind of premised on a whole bunch of points of view that are the result of influencers and not the result of a factual inquiry. And it's worrisome. And I would point out that in the world of foreign affairs, the place that Peter Hegseth is entering in terms of military affairs, we have particular kind of quicksand with respect to that, because all of us baby boomers, all of the generations since the baby boom have in some respects been groomed by the government through the Cold War. We were presented with information that was designed to tell us what it meant to be a patriot, and we needed to believe all of it. And then we all suffered Vietnam and the realization that maybe our government wasn't to be trusted in everything they were telling us about what it was that was right and what it was that was wrong. And then we went through Iraq. And so, we have had a government that has put us onto a very kind of a quicksand with respect to what our foreign affairs are, what they should be, what's right, what's wrong, what's real. And now we have a world of influencing that has taken us in a direction that, as one of the early callers, Debbie pointed out, was the Republican Party has gone from being hawkish in many respects, particularly hawkish in the direction of the Soviet Union and Russia, to now very dovish and supportive of Vladimir Putin and that administration, much softer with respect to what it thinks about authoritarian governments, and only hawkish about China. And so, my fear, I talked about this on an earlier show, is, well, maybe there's some lemonade here. Maybe our foreign policy can get more real. But if our foreign policy simply shifts from being soft on the problems of Eastern Europe, but very hawkish on China and building up a huge military on the notion that we have to be ready to stage a major war with China, we won't make any lemonade. It's just a shift in direction. And so, that was the beginning, I think. I think our foreign policy was maybe a beginning of us getting onto sort of soft quicksand with respect to what's real, what isn't, what facts, what can we believe. Then we had COVID. We had the politicization of vaccinations based on an inability to find a real source of facts. And Mike was pointing out, now we have a world of influencers where fact checking is very difficult. You mentioned fact checking, Mike. How does one go about fact checking when people go to an echo chamber and watch their influencer? Who does the fact checking? Who does the intervening fact checking in that kind of a situation?
It could be an independent panel, a mix of lefties, righties, picked at random. But here's the important thing. When we allow CBS or anybody else to televise our elections, and all of a sudden they're negotiating the rules of the debates, wait a minute. It's our elections. It's not the media's election to negotiate, the rules. That's the most absurd thing that that comes to my mind right now. So the first thing we need to do is reclaim our elections as our property, not the property of the donors or not the property of the influencers, for crying out loud. It's a fundamental 101 thing here. And
I think the collapse of the media, the collapse of the business model of the media as we knew it has played a big role in that. And so the vulnerability of the media to its business risks has made them much more vulnerable to doing things like setting rules that are a negotiation between candidates who are going to be throwing ads to them, right? I mean, most media can report that this last quarter was very good for them because political advertising was big, right? So political advertising is the most important source of media money now, and it puts them in a very vulnerable position to our media. I think what we all need to think about, listeners at large, is what do we do in our next world, in this next phase of our world, where influencers are a primary way that people get their information, and what is the intervening source of independent fact that can create a factual basis for us to have as an underpinning when we listen to people with their opinions. We have Snopes. There are these things you can go to kind of try and figure out the facts. But I feel that part of why our country is going where it's going and why we are vulnerable to authoritarianism is this very principle of echo chamber influencers. And I wish for us that we can work our way through it. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.
And I rule my den. Come on and give me what I want, baby, and I won't troll no more. Well, now I'm trawling, yes, I'm trawling now, baby. I'm trawling in front of your door. You got anything I want now, baby? I'm gonna crawl up on your floor because I'm a crawling